Continuing King Arthur and His Knights by Elizabeth Lodor Merchant. And we are also continuing the chapter Geraint and Enid. Such a chase the three led him, through the dense wood and over the mountain and down into a valley where you could see the towers and roofs of a great city. Through the city gates they rode, with Geraint still hard on their heels. He saw that all the people stood still and saluted the king and the lady as they galloped past, and he noticed, even in his haste, that the courtyards of the house were full of men who were polishing shields and burnishing swords and washing armor and shoeing horses. Excuse the belching and the grumbling stomach. Then the knight and the dwarf and the lady galloped up a hill to a great castle. Its gates were immediately opened with sounds of welcome. The three rode in, and the entrance was closed and barred behind them. As Geraint pulled up his horse, weary and bitterly disappointed, he saw that he was close to a ruined palace which could be approached by way of an old marble bridge that spanned a deep river. He crossed the bridge and was met on the other side by an old man who wore very ragged clothing, but whose voice was gentle and whose manner was gracious. This old man invited the king into the ruined palace, where he was met by an old woman, also in rags, but sweet and dignified. With her was her daughter, whose face and hair were beautiful, though her dress was of poor and rough cloth. They too greeted Geraint in soft voices and offered him what they could in the way of meat and drink. As he ate, the beautiful girl, who was named Enid, looked after his horse, and he watched her with deep admiration in his eyes. Then the poor old couple told him that they were the real lord and lady of the city, but that they had been turned out of their home by the Knight of the Sparrow Hawk. With all this culture of conquering and stuff, you think that anybody who conquered would be the real lord and lady, right? He was the knight whom Geraint had been following, and he lived now in the castle, and every year he held a tournament in the meadow just below it. In this meadow, a sparrow hawk, set up between two high, three-pronged spears, was always the prize of the day. Whoever won it was called Knight of the Sparrow Hawk for a whole year. With the right to live in the castle and to rule over the land. But as the knight himself always won by fair means or foul, there was not really much use in anybody else entering the tournament and doing battle for the prize. Geraint listened, and his heart beat high with hope. "I will fight for the Sparrow Hawk tomorrow," he cried. "I will conquer the knight whose dwarf insulted Queen Guinevere, and I will force him to return your castle and your riches to you, from whom he stole them." The poor old couple looked at him, then at each other, and shook their heads. No knight can fight for the Sparrow Hawk unless the lady is with him, whom he thinks the fairest lady in the world. Long ago, this magic was made in the meadow. It is because the Knight of the Sparrow Hawk never stirs without his lady that he is always able to win the prize. His lady may be beautiful, but she is not half so beautiful as your daughter yonder," cried Geraint eagerly. "Never have I seen a maiden as fair as she." The words were no sooner out of his mouth than the old couple rose to their feet in great excitement. "If you indeed believe that," said they, "if you do really and truly believe it, then take our daughter with you into the meadow tomorrow. We will find some armor for you, and she will make it possible for you to win, because of the magic of which we have told you. And sorceress contests have not actually stopped at all in this day and age, and it may be even more common than it was back then. The next morning dawned beautiful and clear, and a great number of people gathered very early indeed in the meadow where the sparrow-hawk was set up between the two three-pronged spears. When everybody had arrived, a great blast of trumpets was blown at the castle gates. The gates were then flung open, and out rode the enormous knight, with, as usual, the dwarf upon his right hand and the lady upon his left. He drew rein, and his heralds cried out proclamation. Was there anyone present who would come forward and fight for the sparrow-hawk that was set up between the two three-pronged spears? Nobody stirred, and the great knight turned to his lady and bade her go. Take the sparrow-hawk upon her hand, and bring it to him. But just as she was about to set off, a young knight in old rusty armor, on a very tired, half-lame horse, rode forward, and at his side a maiden in rags walked quietly, with neither shoes nor stockings upon her little white feet, and only a coarse hood upon her head. My lady is fair above all others, shouted young Geraint. Come, I will fight you for this sparrow-hawk, and call down the magic of the meadow to help me. Victory will be mine for this sweet maiden. Enid is the loveliest and noblest lady in all the land. Well, is it noble to manipulate through the calling up the various spirits? Then the two knights rushed upon each other with a great clash of arms, while the lady in the royal brocade and the lady in rags looked on. They clashed together, and thrice they brake their spears. Then each, dishorsed and drawing, lashed at each so often and with such blows that all the crowd wondered, and now and then from distant walls there came a clapping as of phantom hands. So twice they fought, and twice they breathed, and still the dew of their great labor and the blood of their strong bodies, flowing, drained their force. Everybody had burst out laughing at Geraint, at his lame horse and his rusty armor, and the beggar maid, he declared, was the fairest lady in all the land. But soon their laughter changed to amazement and admiration, for with the right good will the young stranger hacked and struck and dodged his enemy, until he proved himself by far the cleverer and stronger. And at last a great ringing shout went up from the whole multitude of watchers, for they saw the great knight of the castle thrown to the ground, where he lay, stunned and motionless. Whereupon Geraint rode up to the sparrow-hawk, took it upon his wrist, and carrying it to a very old man and a very old woman who stood among the crowd, presented it to them with the grace of a prince, making an offering to his lawful king and queen. Then another shout went up from the people. They recognized in the poor beggars their rightful lady and their rightful lord. Leaving Geraint to look after the fallen knight, they escorted the old man and woman back into the castle that had been stolen from them. There Geraint presently followed with the beautiful Enid, and with the great defeated knight bound in chains. As for the lady and the dwarf, they had already fled, but all the people were shouting with excitement and gladness, for indeed they were delighted to see their true lord and lady restored to their own home. Well, not all kings were unjust conquerors, now were they? They saw the great knight of the castle thrown down to the ground, where he lay stunned, motionless. Then sweet Enid went upstairs to her own dainty chamber, where she had lived as a little girl, and dressed herself in soft silks and a gossamer veil, and long chains of shining gems. She came down looking like a princess, and Geraint fell more deeply in love with her than ever, but asked her to put her old gown again on, to put on her old gown again, in which he said he would take her to Arthur's court, and there they would be married. Also, he explained, he could not marry his fair lady until the insult to Queen Guinevere had been wiped out. Killing people because of an insult, what's wrong with you? The Knight of the Sparrow Hawk must ride after them to Arthur's court, and must, in his own person, apologize fully and humbly for the behavior of his dwarf. So they set off. Well, can't the dwarf apologize for himself? So they set off, Geraint and his lady, and the knight in chains behind. When they reached Caerleon, Geraint led both his bride and his prisoner into the presence of the queen. The big knight apologized, and the gracious king forgave him. In doing so, he made the conditions that he should go into the waste places of the realm to right wrongs, and uphold the goodly order of the king. But Geraint married Enid with everyone's full approval, and the queen herself gave the wedding dress, and the happy pair remained in the court of King Arthur for the rest of their lives. And Enid tended on him there, and there her constant motion round him, and the breath of her sweet tendance hovering over him, filled all the genial courses of his blood with deeper and with ever deeper love. Genial, yeah. The Middle Ages marriage of running off and saying the vows in secret, and if that ever went wrong, say, oh, we've just been living in sin all these years. Sometimes you can't get the approval of the parents or whatever. That's a good idea, but that's doesn't necessarily stop it, but it's something to distinguish with the community. So definitely don't make it seem like you're a robber or some other thing. Bride kidnapping apparently went on during this age, as we've noticed.